You unlock this benefit with the key of Patreon. Beyond is another dimension. A dimension of thought. A dimension of speculation. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both waffle and substance. Of things and ideas. You've just crossed into the podcast zone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Trekking Through the Twilight Zone, where we take on an episode of the Twilight Zone every week, and we are now into the long distance call. And yes, as usual, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, initial thoughts. What were your thoughts then on this creepy episode, Long Distance Call?
I want it to be creepier. I mean, I think this is a horror episode, and we are addressing the Twilight Zone. This is a companion to Stories Out of Time and Space, which is a science fiction podcast. And one of the problems is Twilight Zone is not entirely science fiction. This is really a supernatural episode. And there's a version of this that I could rewrite that would be an awesome horror episode or even a movie, right?
Yes.
This is not that version. What were your thoughts?
I like it. I like this. I think, again, for the potential. I like the fact that they actually go certain places I was a little surprised by. It went some places I wasn't expecting for a 1960s TV show. And I'm going to lie, this felt pertinent to generational angst that is suffered at the moment a little bit. And there were some things this I really wanted to sort of cover off. But no, I like this episode. I actually think there's some. It has a creepy premise, but doesn't have any creepy moments, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I mean, the plot is basically Billy's grandmother sick. On his 5th birthday party, she gives him a toy telephone that's not plugged in and says that he can always talk to her on it. She quickly becomes ill and dies.
Yeah.
And Billy begins to apparently talk to her on it at all times of night. Then he runs out into the street. He's almost hit by a car. The driver's very disturbed and says that Billy said somebody told him to do it. And then ultimately he is confronted and then almost drowns in a pool at the house. And ultimately the father talks on the phone late at night to the grandmother, doesn't answer. Although the wife has heard this breathing that she recognizes as the grandmother, but we don't hear it. And apparently the grandmother's spirit on the other end of the phone, agrees because Billy is magically healed.
Yes.
Almost. Have I left anything out?
No, just I think really to emphasize the relationship that the grandmother has with Billy and some of the things she said, which we'll get into. Yeah, I think this sort of taps into an interesting thing. So at the moment, there is a definite. We're going through a period now at the moment of grandparent interference in the lives of grandchildren, sort of like an expectation that they're allowed to be a part of that parenting process. It's causing some, you read it, you can easily find stories about this or online of conflicts and tension within families where grandparents are getting too involved. And so there is that at the moment. There is definitely that conflict or tension at the moment. And this film this episode focuses in on that. And this idea of the grandmother is very attached to Billy to the extent that she even acknowledges and says, I got to an age where I thought I was sort of like useless. I was, my relevance was gone. And then Billy gave me life again, has become my son. And sort of like she treats him as such. And there's a really interesting scene where the Billy's dad, who is the grandmother's actual son, says, "Oh no, you mean like grandson?" And she's like, "No, you're dead to me. You've grown up. You were taken." And on a deathbed, she says, "You were taken by another woman, meaning his wife." And so there's this weird sort of like almost like Norman Batesian sort of like, relationship sort of thing here. Not saying it's just an incest or anything like that, but like she's obviously very fixated on her son, who she feels that relationship. But this is the idea. This comes back to another thing that I think is interesting about, especially, and this is very much an American thing, really, of the grandmother clearly has sort of like Eastern European accent. This idea of coming from the motherland, sort of like, this idea of being Eastern European, or Polish, or Ukrainian, or Russian, or whatever, and then sort of having and bringing over those traditions and that sort of thing. But then having that sort of second generation being distanced because they're the ones that were then raised in America, so they don't have the same traditions and all this other stuff. And there's sort of a feel of that as well, that sort of like, Bill is this second chance to sort of to teach a child and to raise a child in this other way. And sort of she obviously harps onto this supernatural thing, which feels very much like harping back to the traditions of like an older motherland, like other place. And I kind of like that as well. And that was this creepy element. And again, if you were to write this as a horror film, that's totally what you'd do. You'd have this built into that sort of the fear of the folklore of the supernatural from a previous era. So I liked all that generational stuff, that intergenerational sort of tension in this episode. I thought was excellent. I really enjoyed some of that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's all fantastic. I hadn't thought about that stuff. And I think you're right that if this were turned into a horror movie, like the version of this that I want to see would play up that stuff. And that's fantastic. I do think that there's an edible component to this. And it's not only in that line about I had a son once, but a woman took him away, right? Imagine if the roles were reversed and a grandfather said, I had a daughter once, but another man stole her from me. We'd be like, creepy, get the hell away. And then the way that she talks to Billy, especially in these conversations on the phone, it's like, presumably we're supposed to believe that she really is in heaven or somewhere talking to Billy, but she's talking like a child, and he's giggling, and they're talking about playing, and she seems very infantilized and infantilizing in the way that she talks. There's something deeply unhealthy about that relationship.
Oh, yes.
But again, it's not played up for the creepiness that I would want it to be.
This episode, because again, we'll get to the resolution of this episode, the conversation, like the monologue from the father at the end on the phone, that's really interesting. But you're right. There's so much potential in this episode for that creepiness of that infantilization. But she sees herself as that mother, so she is playing with it. So because the other thing as well is sort of like it's his birthday. She sort of she inserts herself into the role of mother into the birthday party. Like she cuts the cake to distribute. She talks about when the presents are ready, she makes sure that she is the first one to have hers. She wants hers unwrapped because the mother introduces the present first. I think it's a toy gun, isn't it? Which is one thing, and then instantly she's like, "But what about my present, Billy?" Sort of like, and so she knows that she's competing. And this is the thing about grandparents, and this is an interesting conversation. This is the thing, you read these modern articles about some of these things. The parent has to act as a parent. So you have this parent-child relationships with the children. So, well, you can have a sort of, equal to it at some point, almost like adult to adult at some point. But basically, you're having this parent-child relationship. Like you are the figure of authority. You have to control the amount of cake they eat. You control when the presents arrive. That you are this sort of, you can create the structure. And what's happening is that the grandparent then steps in and says, well, I don't have to act in that parent role. I can almost act in a sort of like child role, almost like as a sort of like a fun authority figure where I will provide some of that structure, but I'll push the boundaries out. So instead of like a fraction of cake, you'll have a little bit more cake. And we'll get to the presents and we'll do the excitement, because then the parent figures have got to clean up the mess. And it's so clear that she is doing that. Like, she's inserting herself as a mother figure, but like is able to get away with being this playful infantized figure because the parents are then going to step in and provide the authority and the sort of the actual parenting. And so I see that sort of being played out time and again. And so I like that. I love the fact that they've seen in this episode that they tap into that, this sort of like, and especially the frustration of the two parents. Like this is not something that's hidden. Like the mother, the woman who plays the mother, they cut to her on several occasions, and the expression on her face is just sort of like, she wants to be turning to her husband and being like, "Your mother is here again." Like, and so yeah, I don't know. I like all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think you have such a profound understanding of these dynamics and the depth of this episode.
My therapist will explain why I have a profound
Well, but it's fantastic and helps me to understand this stuff better. And I think all of it instantly clicks and is right. I can identify with that sort of pushing the boundaries, that sort of like, well, the parents are the ones who have to discipline the child. It's easy, and sometimes I've been that person who comes in for a day and I'm the fun uncle, and but I don't really have to deal with the fallout. And I do see that sort of, mom rolling her eyes, and it's sort of like, and I've seen that in other people's families of sort of the grandmother crossing the boundaries, and it's like, is this worth telling her yet again? Please don't act this way with Billy. This is not appropriate. You're not the parent. And she's going to say, I just love him. What's wrong with loving him? And you're going to have that discussion again. And exactly. It's easier just to roll your eyes.
And even the son, the Chris, the father is sort of is similar. He's like, well, she's almost on the way out. We can let. It has that feeling.
She'll be dead soon. Yeah. Let her do. Yeah.
Let her just get away with it for now. She'll be gone soon. We can move on. But I like this idea that when she does die, like, she reaches out for Billy's hand and that sort of like. And again, this comes back to this. Or comes to an idea of not so much trauma, but being there at that sort of moment of death, and that connection that she then sort of like basically confesses to Billy and stuff. And again, we've said this isn't creepy in the they couldn't go full horror film, like, but there's so much here you could do, sort of like thinking of sort of like just that trauma of sort of the passing and doing more with that, and having the sort of, if you want to lean into like horror movie or ghost story tropes, but it does. But the moment that picks up and she passes, and they then start to have these sort of conversations on the phone, the little kid's not bad. Like, as an actor and doing these bits, I kind of like. He's not Oscar winning. He's not a bad little actor to sort of pull off these scenes of when he's sort of like, who you're talking to? Nobody. Sort of like, it's all creepy enough, but not fully creepy, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think that if you made this into a movie, and I do think that it begs to have that done, you would show the car incident where he's almost hit, and you would show him in the pool. I do find it a little unbelievable that he runs downstairs and he's already drowning he's in the pool, and then even the doctor says, well, if we had gotten a few minutes earlier he was upstairs. But so the timeline is a little bad there, but you can easily seeing those things on film being more creepy. And I also think there's a layer here. I love what you're saying about sort of the old country and ancestor worship-esque practices being pulled into this, and how that doesn't fit with the American ethos. But then also, I'll confess, I'm an atheist. This idea of telling your kids, don't worry, Billy, grandma's in heaven. She's watching you. And that is a super creepy thing to say to a kid, right? Yeah. I remember being told that stuff as a kid and being like, that is so super creepy. And then thinking, well, if you actually believe this and heaven is so wonderful, why aren't you trying to get yourself killed to go there, right?
Well, this is always the argument, isn't it? Sort of like, well, if heaven is so wonderful, why are we not all queuing up to actually get there? Like, I'm not going to get into, because you and I are both atheists. It's sort of like, I'm not going to get into that debate. But you're right. I like this, but I almost like, again, the creepiness of this. One of the things that sort of an idea that popped into my head, because the grandmother does allude to, like, it doesn't go the full Christian. It doesn't sort of say, she doesn't say sort of like, I'm going to be in heaven, Billy. I'm going to have wings and a harp or any of that crap. Like, but there's this suggestion of she believes that there is something beyond. What I would do, and I know I do rewrite this, and we can, but I think this episode sort of warrants it, is the realization that there isn't anything and so she's lonely because there is nothing. So like the grandmother's spirit's got there, and there's nothing other than to wander the earth, and so she's trying to get Billy to join her now because of that sort of like realization, and that's the sort of like the tension. She's like, no, I want Billy with me because there is nothing else.
Yeah, more like a kind of ghost thing than a heaven thing.
Yeah, just like there is no heaven and hell. There is just this sort of like persistent existence that sort of in some way that eventually you will fade away, but I can't face that or something. I don't know. But the motivation for her, but that may sort of muddy the relationship with why she wants Billy. Because in this, it's literally that she just wants to continue that relationship, but it has that, as you said, that Oedipal element. But again, I like the fact that this idea of manipulation as well. I wanted to put in here because it's not just a phone call of someone ringing and saying, I love you and sort of like, I'm watching over you. Because again, I think in Poltergeist, like the first Poltergeist film, in that Carol Ann talks on that sort of plastic phone from the 80s to the spirits from the other side, and she has a conversation with them through that. Same sort of thing, those conversations. But it's this manipulation, this grandparent figure, this sort of family, this loving figure, manipulating this boy, this 5-year-old, into committing suicide.
Yes.
That is so sort of horrific, and I want we never hear the conversations. And so but I'd love them to have tapped into that a little bit more, of like this idea of like, because the father sort of, the dad sort of like, stop it, but there must be something here going like the mother, you do know how evil this is.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about how this could be expanded, we would have Billy trying to cope with the death. We would have those discussions. We would have, I think it would fit perfectly to have the grandmother talking about heaven and, a younger generation kind of rolling their eyes. And we've all been in or seen those situations where the grandparents are saying more old-fashioned religious things to the kids that do not express what the parents, want to teach the kids about religion. And, so that could be a part of it. And, Billy, I mean, one thing that isn't really articulated here is Billy's relationship with his parents, why he's so susceptible to that grandmother's influence, including when she's on the phone. And we can imagine that Billy enjoys playing with the grandmother, who doesn't set the same sort of limits and doesn't have to be the disciplinarian, but showing more stress or tension between Billy and his parents, having him be a little troubled, having him, whether he's a little Aspergery and, his parents can't deal with it, or, something that would just put him at odds with those parents in a way that would make him susceptible would be really good. And then but I like the idea that we don't hear the grandmother. And I mean, I would love to see this expanded and you had time to say, is Billy crazy? Like, no, this is a normal part of grieving. Is it though? Like, you don't really believe this. No, of course not. But, we all grieve in our own way. And then, and then the phone, when she picks up the phone and hears the breathing, that would be the first time. Well, I don't understand why they don't let us hear that breathing and be like, oh my God, that is the grandmother.
That should be I mean, this is where, like, if you did this as a film, there would be that whole, part of the second act where, like, no one believes Billy. Like, Billy's going through grief. He'll see a counselor, but you would have possibly sort of, supernatural things going on in the background, sort of like, drawers would be pulled open or shirt, or, a door wouldn't open. There'd be that little bit of tension opening the door. There'd be little instances of something going on. Billy's relationship with his parents would get tight, would get more tense and sort of more combative. Yeah, that sort of thing, until eventually they'd be like, well, we've got to deal with this until then the supernatural is confirmed by hearing the breathing or whatever. But let's quickly talk about the end of this, because again, I'll sort of touch on it. So the ending of this is, you're right, the timelines don't work, but I like the fact that they go there. So the kid's trying to throw himself in front of a car, and you have the driver sort of like confronting. And I like the fact that the babysitter's like, look, it wasn't me. Like, I didn't tell him anything. Like, she's really sort of like, I don't know what's going on. And the dad sort of, and even the parents were like, no, that's fine. You know, like, all this could be in that film version of this. But again, sort of when I see him in the pool, like, have him hit his head, have him so he's hit his head, he's jumped in and he's hit his head, and that's the real crisis moment as he's gone in. He's hit half the side of the pool. What this brought to me, and one of the best versions of this that was ever put on film, comes like a decade or so later, is Don't Look Now. If I don't know if you've seen it, or if any of the I won't spoil the actual film, but the film starts with it's part of the trailer, so it's not a spoiler really. But so it starts with, it's got these characters, and Donald Sutherland plays this architect, and they live in this English home, and they have a pond, and his daughter, like, he has sort of these psychic flashes, or he does, or his wife does, can't remember, but they have a psychic flash of his daughter, this flash of red falling into this pool, and what he does, he runs out and he finds his daughter has fallen into this pond and she's drowned, and that's sort of the premise of the film. It kicks off the film as like they leave to go to this other place to try and get over the grief. But one of the things that's fascinating is that moment of Donald Sutherland pulling the body out of the water is one of the most heart-wrenching and sort of hardest things to watch. It's brilliantly done. It's really fantastically shot, and it just, but seeing this thing with this pool sort of triggered that for me, where I was just like, the dad plays it relatively well, but there's not enough of, like, you know, he sort of, it's quite a small set, but like, again, if anyone gets a chance, like, Google it, you look on YouTube, Don't Look Now, Donald Sutherland sort of finding his daughter is absolutely horrific. It's incredibly well done, and it just felt that thing as well too, like losing a child, the potential to lose a child, is, you know, that is the fact that the Twilight Zone did that. I was really impressed. Like, it went there, and I was like, Jesus, this show's really going to push those boundaries. Well done. I don't know what we all thought, but that sort of moment of sort of, like, you know, seeing the body in the pool.
Yeah, you're right. That, I mean, well, we don't see the body. You know, we don't even really see the body. We don't see much of you know, the parents' reactions, and I think that's a missed opportunity. And sure, okay, so it's March 1961. All right, I get it, but still, you know, I mean, you're describing a very effective version of that really drives home this parental fear that really should be there through the whole episode, right? You know, and this could contrast the. Now, obviously, we're coming from a later generation, but this could contrast the more helicopter parenting, safety conscious, you know, younger generation or parents' generation with the older sort of, you know, connections to the old country and you know, not being so preoccupied with safety in the same way. And that happens too, right?
Yes.
Grandparents will give the kids a toy or something to play with, and the parents are like, Grandma, how could you not run this past us?
Yeah. Like, what do you mean? We used to juggle machetes when I was his age.
Right. You'll put your eye out.
Yeah. And there is that thing of safety. I know it's gone too far, you know. But the final moment of the father, because at this point, the father figure hasn't believed. Like, he thinks it's all a nonsense. But then to give in and have his last desperate need be to answer the phone, to make that phone call on that toy phone, and him to basically say, like, I don't know if this works or not. I don't know where you are, but, like, look, it's not even. I like the fact it's not even. It's not the monologue isn't. Don't take him away from me. It's he's 5. He hasn't thrown up, you know, he hasn't played ball. He hasn't gone to school. He hasn't, you know, learned about girls, drive a car, and all these things. Like, let him live. Like, give him life. You know, that's your gift to him. Let him have a life. And I thought that was a really nice sort of moment, rather than give me back my child. It was give him an opportunity to be, a person.
Right, and to grow up. I mean, I like that too, and you make a very good point. I was sort of put off by, it should be a very powerful monologue. I was sort of put off by how pedestrian and white and Midwestern, you know, it is. Like, you know, let my son live. he's gonna be with girls and he's gonna play baseball, and it's like, Billy's gonna be like, sorry, Daddy, I'm gay. I want, I don't like any of those things. I don't know. As a nonconformist, I found, it's like really, and also like working with actually autistic kids, one of the big problems is the parents' expectations that they fit a certain mold. And so for me, seeing these white WASP parents kind of have that vision, it's not coming from a bad place, as you say. I mean, that is the tone it should take. Do this for Billy, not for me. But I was kind of rubbed the wrong way by how conventional his dream of his son's life is.
I know what you mean. I agree. Taking in consideration, this is 1961.
Yeah.
It is very much of the time, and I agree. And again, if you were to do this now, it would be that thing of like he didn't that, and that would be the point. Like Billy didn't know who Billy was.
Yeah.
Like, you've taken away the opportunity for Billy to find out who you knew. 5-year-old Billy, like I want to know 15, 20, 25-year-old Billy, like whoever that could be. Like let him find out who he is. That's and I think that would be really cool. I think that's what you do with the modern one, sort of like. But yeah, it works for me though. I like this appeal, and I was quite because I've gone through this generational thing, this idea of this generational thing. I like the fact that there was no. I just want to hammer this point home. There was no ownership in that moment of like, give me back my son. There was just a sort of like, do it for Billy. There was no, and I like that. So I like that there was that sort of idea of sort of like, I've almost learnt the lesson. I'm not going to have this idea of ownership. I want just want my son to be alive to survive this. So I thought that was kind
with
of
a
cool.
little bit of change of dialogue, you could really bring that home. And I think what you're getting at is sort of, you could do this as two generations sort of fighting over what the next generation is. And, the father having to come to, because the best horror films are all metaphors for something, right? The father coming to this realization, I don't get to determine the next generation. He does not have to have my values, and he doesn't have to have my grandmother's or my mother's values. His life is going to be his to decide, and we both collectively owe it to him to let him grow up and figure that out.
Yeah. And I think that would at this point now in history time, 2022, that wouldn't be a bad film to make. Like that would be a good message to send. So watching this episode, I actually sort of dug into that, and I found that really sort of this episode that's 60 years old really interesting to be this sort of about this, especially about generation. And before we started, we were talking about this idea of legacy. It felt really pertinent to me, so I love this episode. I really this was a hit for me, this episode.
I'm glad. I think this was better than the last two. It didn't strike me on those same levels or as deeply as you, but I love everything you're saying. And as a final thought, look, Blumhouse, you can make this for $1 million. Call us.
Yeah. Jason Blum, if you're sort of thinking of doing this stuff, easy, do this, it'd be amazing. I'll put it out there, see what happens. Anyway, that's his final thought. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. That's a long distance call. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you appreciate our trek through the Twilight Zone. But for now, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.